"I only have a few months left to live," he pleaded with her, but it was all a lie. Today I'm going to share with you a story that unfolds across the golden fields of Missouri in the late 19th century, a time when decisions were made with the weight of the earth underfoot, and hope was cultivated like the wheat that fed families. This is the story of Clara Hayes, a woman who knew widowhood far too young, and of Thomas Brennan, a man who learned how to live when he had already given up on life. It is a narrative about how true love sometimes blooms from the most improbable circumstances, and how redemption can flourish even in the driest soils of the human soul. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching us from? Leave your city, state, or country in the comments. I love knowing that these stories cross borders and touch hearts in so many different places. And if you appreciate narratives that speak of hope, overcoming hardship, and the transformative power of true love, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Your support keeps these stories which need to be told alive. Now take a deep breath, close your eyes for a moment, and come with me. Green River Valley, Missouri spring of 1887. The Green River water ran brown on that April morning, swollen by the rains that had washed over the hills for 3 consecutive days. Clara Hayes knelt on the smooth river stones, her already rough hands plunging into the basket of soaking laundry. The homemade soap left a trail of white foam that the current carried far away, to some place she would never know. She was 26 years old and had the permanent feeling of carrying the world on her shoulders. Behind her, Samuel, always Samuel, never Sam, because that's how his father would have wanted it, was playing among the larger stones, 5 years old, and possessing that curiosity that made her heart clench with fear and love at the same time. The boy had his father's eyes, that deep brown that held too many questions for such a small child. "Don't wander off, Samuel," she called without turning her head, her hands continuing the automatic motion of scrubbing, wringing, beating the clothes against the rock. The sound that followed was one every mother recognizes instantly, the sharp cry of surprise, the splash of water broken by a body too small. Clara turned in a movement that seemed to cross centuries, her eyes finding only the river, the ripples where Samuel had been, his straw hat spinning on the surface like a dead leaf. She didn't think. Mothers' bodies don't think. But before she could dive in, before she could choose to drown alongside him if necessary, a black horse appeared upriver in a furious gallop. The rider, tall, broad-shouldered beneath his work shirt, threw himself from the saddle while still moving. The water exploded around him. Time melted. Clara stood on the bank, hands over her mouth, unable to breathe, to pray, to do anything but exist in that pure terror of seeing her child disappear beneath murky waters. When the man emerged, Samuel was in his arms, coughing, spitting water, alive. Alive. Clara ran, stumbled, fell to her knees in the shallows, tore the boy from the stranger's arms and clutched him to her chest with a force that must have hurt, but was the only way to confirm he was still there, his heart still beating against hers. It's okay, Mama's here," she whispered repeatedly, like an incantation. The man remained in the water, breathing heavily, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes, blue as she had never seen, the color of the sky after a storm, rested on her for an instant. There was something in that gaze, an exhaustion that had nothing to do with the plunge into the river. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hoarse, "the boy will be fine." Then he stepped out of the water, took the reins of the patiently waiting horse, and mounted. Clara wanted to thank him, wanted to ask his name, wanted to offer something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. He turned the horse and rode back down the path that bordered the river, leaving only traces of water on the stones and a silence that seemed greater than the sound of the current. Clara held Samuel, who was already calming down, and looked at the abandoned basket of clothes. Life went on. It always did. But that night, when she tucked the boy in and kissed his forehead, still warm with a slight fever, she sat by the window of the small house she could barely call home. She thought of the stranger's blue eyes. She thought of the weight of the world. She thought that perhaps there were things in the universe she didn't understand, invisible currents that carried people to where they needed to be. 3 days later, on an afternoon when the sun had finally returned, a knock came at the door. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and opened it. It was him. The man from the river stood there, hat in his hands, clean shirt, his hair combed back. Up close she could see the details, the thin scar above his left eyebrow, the neatly trimmed beard, the large calloused hands of someone who knew hard work. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, and the fact that he knew her name surprised her. "My name is Thomas Brennan. People call me Tom." She waited. There was a script for these situations, but he seemed to be improvising. Tom looked down at his own feet, then back up at her. I need to speak with you. About an important matter. Clara opened the door wider. Please come in, Mr. Brennan. He stepped into the small parlor, his eyes sweeping over the sparse furniture, the mended rocking chair, the faded curtains. There was no judgment in his gaze, only observation. Would you like coffee? She offered, because it was what one did. No, thank you. He spun the hat between his hands. I'll be direct, if you allow me. I'm not a man for pleasantries. Clara nodded, her heart starting to beat faster without knowing why. I own a farm west of here, 200 acres of good land, a large house, a barn, cattle. He paused. And I need a wife. The silence that followed had texture, weight. Clara felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Mr. Brennan. Tom. Please. Tom. She swallowed hard. I don't know you. I know. Something crossed his face, too quick to capture. But I came here to change that, if you permit me. Clara glanced toward the hallway where Samuel was taking his afternoon nap. She looked at the peeling walls of the rented house she could barely afford by washing laundry and doing needlework. She looked at her own hands, red and cracked. She looked back at Thomas Brennan and saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. It wasn't love. Love needed time. It wasn't desire. Desire had a different quality. It was something else. Something darker and strangely more honest. Very well, she heard herself say. You may speak. And as he began to explain, the afternoon sun streamed through the window and turned the dust motes into golden particles dancing in the air between them, like silent witnesses to an agreement that would change everything. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table, a cup of cooling coffee between them. Clara had insisted. She needed something to occupy her hands while she listened. Tom started at the beginning, which she appreciated. He said he was 34, that the farm had belonged to his parents, who died of typhoid fever when he was 19, that he had spent 15 years transforming that modest property into something prosperous, cattle, wheat, a few horses. I never had time for other things, he said, looking at the coffee he wasn't drinking. Or perhaps I never had the courage. And now? Clara asked, her voice firmer than she felt. Tom raised his eyes to her, and it was then that Clara saw it. It wasn't in his eyes, but around them, in the fine lines, in the shadow he carried like a second burden. 3 months ago I went to St. Louis to see a doctor, Dr. Harrison. He said the name like a sentence. I had been having problems, night coughs, weight loss, sweats. Clara's heart tightened. She knew those words. Every woman on the prairie knew them. Tuberculosis, Tom said, the word dropping between them like a stone in a well. Advanced. The doctor was clear. He said, I have a year, perhaps less. Clara looked down at her own hands, then up at him. And you came to ask me to marry you. It wasn't a question, but he answered nonetheless. I have a sister, Margaret, Maggie as I call her. Something bitter entered his voice. She married a man named Edward Collins 3 years ago. Ambitious, manipulative, he sees my farm as her inheritance. And it is, Clara said softly. It would be. Tom straightened in his chair. If I die without a legitimate heir, but if I marry, if there is a widow, an adopted child, he didn't need to finish. Clara understood immediately. She knew the laws, the rules governing property and inheritance. A wife would have rights. An adopted son would too. You are offering me security, she said slowly, in exchange for 1 year of your time. Tom leaned forward, perhaps less, and afterward everything will be yours. The farm, the house, the bank accounts. Samuel will have a home, a future. The pragmatism of the proposal was, in a way, more honest than any declaration of love could be. Clara thought of Samuel. She thought of the bills she couldn't pay, the nights she slept hungry so the boy could eat. You don't know me, she said. How do you know I won't? Simply wait it out. Tom smiled, and it was the first time she saw something warm in his face. Because I saved your son from the river, Mrs. Hayes. I saw how you ran to him, how you held him. He paused. Mothers like that don't abandon anyone, not even a dying man. The tears came before Clara could stop them. She quickly wiped them away, annoyed by her own weakness. When? She asked. Sunday, at the town's Presbyterian church. Tom put his hat back on. Reverend Matthews has already been advised. So soon. I don't have time for a courtship, Mrs. Hayes. He stood up. I only have time for the truth. After he left, Clara sat in the chair as the afternoon slid toward twilight. Samuel woke up, and she fed him, bathed him, and sang the songs she always sang. The boy didn't ask about the visitor. He was too small to understand that the world was about to change. That night, Clara lay down and looked at the moisture-stained ceiling. She thought of her first husband, William, whom she had loved in her own way, who had died so stupidly, so young, leaving her with a son and debts. She thought of Tom Brennan, a stranger offering a deal that seemed too good, and simultaneously too cruel. A dying man, a boy needing a home, a woman tired of surviving instead of living. Sometimes, she thought, life doesn't give us romantic choices, only practical ones. And practical, Clara knew how to be. On Sunday, she wore her only good dress, dark blue mended at the sleeves, and braided her brown hair into a bun. Samuel wore his Sunday clothes, confused but obedient. They walked to the church where Tom awaited them, stiff in a suit that must have belonged to his father. Reverend Matthews married them in 5 minutes. There were witnesses, 2 of Tom's farmhands whom Clara didn't know. There were no flowers, music, or kisses. Only words, signatures, and the weight of promises made under God's roof. When they stepped out into the morning sun, Clara was Mrs. Brennan, and somehow, strangely, that name sounded less alien than it should have. The house was bigger than any place Clara had ever lived. 2 stories of white wood, porches in the front and back, windows that let light into every room. When Tom stopped the wagon in front, Samuel grabbed her hand tightly. "Is this where we're going to live?" the boy whispered, his eyes wide. "Yes," Clara replied, her own voice filled with awe. Tom got down first and offered his hand to help her. The touch was brief, formal, but she felt the warmth and strength in those calloused fingers. He picked up Samuel as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and the boy did not protest. "Want to see the horses?" Tom asked, and for the first time, Clara saw genuine softness in his face. Samuel nodded, shy but interested. Tom led him toward the barn while Clara stood there, looking at the house that was now hers. It didn't seem real. None of it seemed real. A woman emerged from the front door, drying her hands on an apron. In her 50s, kind face, curious but gentle eyes. "Mrs. Brennan," she said, and Clara was still surprised by the name. "I'm Mrs. Porter. I help around the house twice a week. Tom asked me to prepare the rooms for you. Please call me Clara." "Clara, then." Mrs. Porter smiled. "Come, I'll show you everything." The house was clean but austere, with the quality of a place maintained out of necessity, not love. Good furniture but lacking personality. No photographs on the walls, no embroidered towels, no vase of flowers. It was the house of a man who lived, but did not dwell. The master bedroom had a bed that was too large, an oak wardrobe, a chair by the window. Mrs. Porter hesitated at the door. "Tom prepared the guest room for himself. He said you would stay here." Clara nodded, grateful for the discretion. It was a marriage of convenience, after all. There was no need for pretense. Samuel's room was next to hers, small but cozy, with a wooden bed and a window overlooking the fields. The boy ran to her when Tom finally brought him back, his eyes shining. "Mama, the horses! And there are calves. Tom said I can help feed them." Tom stood in the hallway, watching the boy's excitement with an expression Clara couldn't decipher. When their eyes met, he shrugged. "Farm work starts early. If he's going to grow up here, he better learn right away." That first evening they had dinner at the large kitchen table, stew that Mrs. Porter had left, fresh bread, butter from the farm. Samuel ate as he hadn't in months, and Clara felt a lump in her throat seeing him so simply happy. Tom ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. There was no pressure to fill the void with empty words. After dinner, Clara put Samuel to bed. The boy fell asleep immediately, exhausted by the day's emotions. She stood there for a moment, looking at the small face nestled in the soft pillow. "You're making the right choice," she whispered, although she didn't know if she was trying to convince her son or herself. When she went downstairs, Tom was on the porch, looking out at the dark fields. She stood in the doorway, uncertain. "Clara," he said without turning around, "you can sleep soundly. This house is yours now. Nothing will be asked of you except company, for as long as there is time." His brutal honesty was disconcerting and somehow liberating. "Thank you," she said softly. "I should be thanking you." He finally turned around. In the dim lamplight, his face looked younger, more vulnerable. For accepting this, for giving Samuel a home, for being here. Clara didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and went to her new room where she slept more deeply than she had in years. Days turned into weeks. Samuel lost his initial shyness, following Tom through the fields like a small, persistent shadow. The man, to his own surprise, discovered patience he hadn't known he possessed. He taught the boy how to hold the reins, how to whistle for the sheepdogs, how to check if the calves were healthy. Clara found her own rhythm. She cooked, and discovered she liked having enough ingredients. She cleaned and transformed the austere house into something closer to a home. Small things, wildflowers in jars, new hand-stitched curtains, tablecloths with simple embroidery. Tom noticed. He never said anything directly, but she saw it in his eyes when he stopped in the kitchen doorway watching her work. There was amazement there, as if he were seeing something he had forgotten could exist. And slowly, so slowly that neither of them noticed when it began, the house started to breathe. Margaret Brennan Collins arrived one June afternoon, when the heat already made the air shimmer over the wheat fields. Her carriage, too fine for farm roads, stopped in front of the house in a whirlwind of dust. Clara was in the garden, planting tomatoes. She stood up, wiping her hands on her skirt, and watched the woman alight. Maggie was beautiful in a sharp way, blonde hair pinned up in an elaborate bun, a dark green traveling dress with lace details, white kid gloves. But it was the eyes Clara noticed, the same blue as Tom's, but cold, calculating. "You must be the new Mrs. Brennan," Maggie said, her voice too sweet to be genuine. "Margaret," Clara replied, extending her hand. "Tom told me about you." Maggie glanced at the dirtied hand and, after a deliberate pause, shook it briefly before pulling off her stained glove with an expression of distaste. "I need to speak with my brother. Where is he?" "In the wheat fields." Clara kept her voice neutral. "But he's due back for lunch soon. Would you like to come in?" Maggie entered as if assessing every detail, her eyes scanning the furniture, the new curtains, the vase of wildflowers on the hall table. Her face revealed nothing, but Clara felt the judgment like a cold current. When Tom entered, dirty from work and sweat, he stopped upon seeing his sister. Something hardened in his face. "Maggie, Thomas." She did not rise from the sofa where she had settled like a queen. "What a pleasant surprise to learn of your marriage. Through the newspapers, I might add. I didn't see the need to invite you." The air between the siblings was thick with history, with old wounds Clara didn't know. She started to withdraw, but Tom shook his head. "Stay. You're part of this family now." Maggie smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Family. What a lovely word. You marry a stranger in haste, adopt her child and call that family. "What do you want, Maggie?" Tom crossed his arms. "What I always want. To know you're well." Her voice was sweet, but there was venom beneath it. "And to ensure that the interests of our family, the real Brennan family, are protected. This farm is mine, for now." Maggie stood up, smoothing her skirt. But a sick man, married in haste to a poor widow, well, people talk. They ask questions. Clara felt her blood boil, but she remained silent. She watched Tom, saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. "There is nothing to question. Clara is my lawful wife. Samuel is my stepson. And when you die?" Maggie said the words crudely, without subtlety. "It all goes to her? A woman you've known for a month? That is exactly what will happen." Maggie walked toward the door, pausing on the threshold. "Edward has friends, lawyers, people who understand inheritance laws. I only came to warn you, brother." She looked directly at Clara. "Don't think it will be so simple." After she left, Clara and Tom stood in silence. Samuel was playing outside, oblivious to the storm that had just passed through the room. "I'm sorry," Tom finally said. "You don't need to be. Maggie wasn't like this." He sat down heavily in a chair. "When we were kids, she was kind. She took care of me when our mother died. But Edward, he changed her." Clara approached, hesitated, then placed her hand on his shoulder. "I won't give up this house, Tom, if that's what worries you." He looked up, something breaking in his face. "It's not the house I worry about. It's you. It's Samuel. Maggie can make your lives impossible. Then we will face her together." The word "together" hung between them, more significant than any marriage vow. In the following weeks, Maggie delivered on her implied threat. She showed up without warning, always with some excuse, checking on Tom, bringing supplies, offering help. But Clara saw what she was really doing, observing, asking questions of the farmhands, examining papers when she thought no one was looking. Edward Collins came once, a thin man with a wispy mustache and eyes that never stopped calculating. He stayed for half an hour, long enough for Tom to clench his fists and for Clara to realize exactly why her husband hated the man. He controls her, Tom said afterward when they were alone. Maggie had dreams. She wanted to study, perhaps be a teacher. Edward convinced her to marry, promised her the world. Now she's just an extension of his ambition. Clara thought about that while preparing dinner. She thought about trapped women, about choices made for love that turned out to be cages. She thought that, ironically, her marriage of convenience offered more freedom than many unions based on passion. That evening, Clara sat down at the piano she had discovered in one of the disused rooms. It was out of tune, covered in dust. She had cleaned it and, tentatively, begun to play again, something she hadn't done since before William died. Tom stopped in the hallway when he heard the music. He stood there in the semi-darkness, listening to Clara play an old waltz. When she finished, he came in. "I didn't know you played. My mother taught me." Clara stroked the keys. "I haven't had a piano for years. Play whenever you want." He approached her. "I like listening. It makes the house feel alive." It was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given, and Clara felt warmth rise in her cheeks. In that moment, they forgot about Maggie, about illness, about practical agreements. They were just two human beings sharing music in a house that was slowly ceasing to be merely a shelter and becoming a home. Summer settled over the Green River Valley with its thick golden heat. The wheat fields ripened, undulating like an ocean in the wind. Clara woke before dawn, made strong coffee and fresh bread, and watched Tom leave for work while Samuel still slept. But after a few weeks she started going out too, first just to take water and food to the workers, then to help where she could, tying sheaves of wheat, carrying baskets, noting production numbers. Tom initially protested. "You don't have to do this." "I do." Clara wiped the sweat from her forehead. "I can't just stay in the house." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded, and so, side by side, they worked under the relentless sun. It was during those long days that they began to truly talk. Small things first. Tom talking about the animals, Clara sharing recipes her mother had taught her. Then bigger, heavier things. "William was a good man," Clara said one day as they rested in the shade of the barn, "but distracted, always with his head in other places. That's how he died. Distracted in the wrong place at the wrong time." Tom said nothing, just listened. "Sometimes I get angry at him for being so careless, for leaving us." She looked at her own hands. "Does that make me bad?" "No," Tom said softly. "Just human." It was the permission she didn't know she needed. She cried there discreetly, and Tom didn't try to comfort her. He just stayed a solid, constant presence until the tears dried. Another day, it was Tom who spoke. "When my parents died, Maggie was 20. I was 19. We buried them both in the same week." His voice was distant. "Maggie wanted to sell the farm, go to the city, but I couldn't. This land, it was all that was left of them. So you stayed, I stayed, and Maggie stayed too, for a while, until she met Edward." He pulled up a blade of grass. "I think she blames me for trapping her here, for choosing dead dirt over her dreams." "Dirt isn't dead," Clara said. "It's alive. It breathes, it grows, it gives life." Tom looked at her with something akin to admiration. "It is, isn't it?" In August, Clara took over the farm's books. The numbers were in disarray, accounts mixed up with no system. She organized everything in a week, revenues separated from expenses, harvest forecasts, agreements with buyers. "Where did you learn this?" Tom asked, impressed, flipping through the new ledgers. "Necessity. After William died, no one else would manage the accounts." She smiled shyly. "I discovered I had a knack for it. More than a knack." He closed the book carefully, as if it were something precious. "You have real talent." The compliment warmed her more than the August sun. The evenings changed too. After putting Samuel to bed, Clara and Tom developed a routine. They would sit on the porch, she with her needlework, he with a book or simply gazing at the fields. They talked, or they didn't talk. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was companionship. One night Tom coughed. It wasn't the first time Clara had heard it, but this time it was louder, longer. When he stopped, he dabbed his mouth with a handkerchief. There was no blood. Clara checked with the corner of her eye, but the cough was deep, resonant. "Is it getting worse?" she asked softly. "I don't know." He looked up at the stars. "Sometimes I wonder if the doctor was right. I don't feel like I'm dying. Maybe you aren't." Maybe. But there was no hope in his voice. "It doesn't matter anymore, either way." "It does," Clara insisted. "It matters to Samuel. It matters to me." He turned to look at her, surprised. "Why?" Clara didn't have a ready answer, or she did, but she wasn't ready to say it. That in the last few weeks, waking up and seeing him at the breakfast table had become her favorite part of the day. That the way he treated Samuel, with infinite patience and genuine kindness, touched her deeply. That slowly, without realizing it, she had begun to see him not as the dying man who had offered her a deal, but just as Tom. "Because you matter," she finally said. The words hung in the night air, loaded with meanings neither of them was ready to explore. Tom opened his mouth, closed it, then simply nodded. The next day, Clara found the piano in tune. Tom had brought a man from the city without telling her. When she pressed the keys and heard the clear, perfect notes, something tightened in her chest. That night, she played while Tom listened. Samuel came too, lying on the rug near his mother. And in that moment, they were what a family should be, not perfect, not conventional, but real. United not by blood or passion, but by something more enduring. Choice. A daily choice. Renewed with every dawn to stay, to try, to care. And somewhere, without them noticing, their practical agreement began to transform into something no contract could define. September arrived with the first cool breezes that promised autumn. Clara was in Tom's office, looking for seed receipts to add to the ledgers, when the envelope fell from between the pages of an accounting book. It was open, the St. Louis stamp visible in the upper corner. Dr. Harrison. She recognized the name. Without much thought, she unfolded the letter. The first lines were medical formalities. But then, "I am writing to correct a grave error. The results we discussed in March belong to another patient, Mr. Thomas Brenner, not Mr. Thomas Brennan. Your diagnosis was mistakenly switched by the administrative staff." Clara's heart stopped. She reread the words, then continued, "Your actual tests show excellent lung health. There are no signs of tuberculosis or any other severe illness. I deeply regret the error and the unnecessary suffering caused. Please contact my office at your convenience." The letter was dated August, 2 months ago. Clara slowly sat down in the chair, her legs suddenly weak. Tom wasn't dying. He never was. And he had known it for 2 months. 2 months during which they continued living as before. 2 months in which he said nothing, changed nothing, as if the news that he would live was irrelevant. The office door opened and Tom walked in, stopping when he saw her expression. "Clara? What?" She held up the letter, her hand trembling slightly. "When were you going to tell me?" He saw the envelope and all the color drained from his face. You're fine, healthy. There's no illness." The words came out harsh, accusatory. "And you decided not to tell me?" Tom closed the door behind him but didn't approach. "It's not that simple." "It seems quite simple." Clara stood up, anger warming her chest. "You deceived me. We married under false pretenses. I thought—" She stopped, realizing what she was about to say. That she had thought they were building something real, even if temporary. That every day together meant something, because the days were numbered. But if they weren't, what did any of it mean? "I thought it didn't matter," Tom said, his voice rough. "Whether I was dying or not, the agreement remains the same." "The agreement?" Clara felt something snap inside her. "You think this is still about the agreement? What else would it be?" The silence that followed was deafening. Clara saw it in his face, the genuine incomprehension, the emptiness where understanding should have been. He truly didn't understand. Or worse, he didn't allow himself to understand. "Leave," she said softly. "Clara, leave." He left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than a slam. Clara sat down again, the letter still in her hands. She read it once more, as if the words might change. But they remained the same. Tom was alive. He would live for decades, probably. And he had chosen not to share that with her. But why? The question echoed in her mind for the rest of the day. She prepared dinner automatically, fed Samuel, and answered the boys' questions about Tom with monosyllables. Tom didn't appear for dinner. He stayed in the barn, Clara presumed. She put Samuel to bed, kissed his forehead, and went to her own new room. But she couldn't sleep. She lay looking out the window at the dark fields, trying to understand. A man discovers he's not dying. It should be the best possible news. But Tom had received that news and nothing changed. He continued as before, as if life and death were indifferent. And that's when Clara understood. Tom wasn't lying when he said the diagnosis didn't matter, because to him he was already dead, not in body but in soul. The illness had only been an excuse to formalize what he already felt, that his life had ended years ago when he buried his parents and chose dirt over dreams. Her anger began to dissolve, replaced by something more complicated: sadness, compassion, and surprisingly determination. If Tom had given up on living, then she wouldn't let him continue that way. Not when Samuel had started to love him like a father. Not when she herself had started to... Clara stopped that thought before she could complete it, but it lingered on the periphery of her consciousness, as insistent as the music she played on the piano every night. Outside, in the barn, Tom sat in the straw, head in his hands. He had seen Clara's expression, the betrayal, the anger, the hurt, but he hadn't fully understood. She was safe now. She had the farm, a guaranteed future. What else mattered? But something in him knew he was wrong, that he had lost something important. That Dr. Harrison's letter wasn't just about his body being healthy, but about having a reason to use that health, and he had thrown that reason away for fear of what? Of hope? Of life? Of feeling again? The answer didn't come. So Tom lay down in the straw, looking up at the barn ceiling, and for the first time in 15 years, he wished he had someone to teach him how to live again. Unknowing that at the very same moment in the big house, Clara was making exactly that decision. Clara didn't seek him out immediately. She let a day pass, then another. Tom appeared for meals, but he sat far away, his eyes avoiding hers. Samuel noticed the tension, becoming quieter, clinging more to his mother. On the third day, Clara went to the stable where she knew Tom would be, brushing the horses. It was late afternoon, the golden light streaming through the cracks in the wood, dust dancing in the air. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door. Tom didn't stop brushing. "About what?" "You know about what." He finally paused, his hands resting on the horse's back. "I already said. It changes nothing." "It changes everything." Clara walked around to stand in front of him. "You have a whole life ahead of you, Tom. You are not condemned." "No?" He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Then why does it feel like I am?" "Because you choose to be." The words came out harsher than she intended, but they were true. Tom stared at her, his blue eyes flashing. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand." The outburst caught him off guard. Tom dropped the brush, ran his hands through his hair. When he spoke, his voice was broken. "I was 19 when they died. My parents." He wasn't looking at her, but somewhere beyond. "A week. That's all it took. Typhoid fever. My mother first, then my father 3 days later. They said he died of a broken heart." Clara waited, knowing he needed to continue. "Maggie was hysterical. She wanted to run away from here, sell everything, forget. But I couldn't. This farm, it was all we had left of them. So, I stayed. I worked." He looked at his own hands. 16 hours a day, every day. "I built, I expanded, I prospered. And for what?" "For you," Clara said softly. "For nothing." Tom finally faced her. "I built an empty empire, Clara. A house where no one laughed. Fields that produced but brought no joy. I existed, but I didn't live. And when the doctor gave the diagnosis, it was almost a relief." The confession came out in a whisper. Finally, a reason to stop. An excuse to give up that wasn't cowardice. Clara felt tears burn her eyes. And the marriage. To me, it was my last act of control, to ensure that everything I built went to someone who deserved it, not to Edward and his greed. He took a step toward her. "You and Samuel, you were my last chance to do something that mattered, but you weren't prepared for us to matter for real." The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Tom closed his eyes. "No, I wasn't." Clara took a deep breath. "When did you open the letter?" 3 weeks after it arrived. He opened his eyes, looking directly at her. "I was in the office, tidying papers. I saw it there, open. I thought it was old. But then I read the date, and nothing changed. Should it have changed?" He sounded genuinely confused. "You already had the farm legally. Samuel had a home. The terms of the agreement were fulfilled." "Agreement." Clara repeated the word as if it were foreign. "Is that all we are to you? An agreement? I don't know what else we could be." The brutal honesty of the answer was worse than any lie. Clara turned away, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed in front of him. "Samuel calls you Papa now. Did you know?" She heard his breath hitch. "Not when we're near, but when he's playing, when he talks about the horses, the harvests. Papa showed me." Papa said. She still didn't look at him. "And I wake up in the morning and my first reaction is to check if you're already up. I make coffee the way you like it. I play the piano because you said you like to listen." "Clara." "No." She finally turned around. "You need to hear this. It might have started as an agreement, Tom, but somehow without either of us noticing it became more. At least for me, for Samuel. And if you can't see that, if you can't feel that, then what? His voice was hoarse. Then maybe you're as dead as you thought you were. The words were like a slap. Tom recoiled as if he'd been physically hit. Clara saw the pain cross his face, saw something break behind those blue eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I don't know how. I never learned how to live," Clara finished. "Then learn now. You have time. You have a family. You have a chance most people never get. A second chance not just to live but to learn why." She headed for the door, but Tom spoke before she could leave. "What if I fail? What if I don't know how to be what you need?" Clara stopped, her hand on the latch. "Then fail trying, Tom. It's better than giving up before you start." She left, leaving him in the stable with the horses and his own truths. That night, Tom did not appear for dinner. Clara fed Samuel, who asked where his stepfather was. "Working," she replied, although she didn't know if it was true. Later, when the house was silent, she heard footsteps on the porch. She looked out the window and saw Tom, just a silhouette against the starlit sky. He stood there for a long time, so still he could have been a statue. Then, slowly, he raised his hands and covered his face, and Clara realized he was crying, perhaps for the first time in 15 years. She didn't go to him. Some things a man needs to face alone, but she stayed at the window, watching, waiting, witnessing the moment when Thomas Brennan finally began to mourn everything he had lost by choosing to survive instead of live. And somewhere that night something changed. Not drastically, not visibly, but it changed, like the first crack in the ice of a frozen river, promising the arrival of spring. The autumn painted the fields gold and crimson. Clara received a letter from her mother, Martha, asking if she could come spend Thanksgiving with them. When she mentioned it to Tom, he was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. "It's been 15 years since I celebrated Thanksgiving," he finally said. "Then it's time," Clara replied with a firmness that allowed no argument. Martha Hayes arrived in a rented wagon 3 days before the holiday. She was a small but strong woman, grey hair pulled back in a bun, gentle but sharp eyes. She hugged Clara tightly, then knelt to pull Samuel against her chest. When she stood up and saw Tom, standing uncomfortably in the doorway, she walked straight up to him and, to everyone's surprise, hugged him too. "So you're the man who saved my grandson," she said, "and gave my daughter a real home." Tom was stiff in the embrace, clearly unsure how to react. But Martha just smiled and walked into the house as if she had always belonged there. In the following days, she transformed everything. She cooked recipes that made the house smell of spices and sugar. She told stories from when Clara was little, stories that made her daughter blush and Samuel laugh. She insisted that Tom sit at the table for meals instead of escaping to the barn. "A man needs family around the table," she declared. "Work can wait." And strangely, Tom obeyed. He sat down, initially quiet, then slowly beginning to participate. Martha had the gift of asking questions that didn't feel like interrogations, of listening as if every word was precious. On the eve of Thanksgiving, while Clara and Martha prepared the turkey stuffing, Tom took Samuel out to pick pumpkins in the field. Clara watched from the window, the big man and the small boy, holding hands, walking among the fallen leaves. "He loves you," Martha said softly. Clara turned, surprised. "Tom, he may not know it yet. Men like that take time to recognize what they feel." Martha kneaded the dough with experienced hands. "But it's there, in his eyes, when he looks at you, in the way he sits up straighter when you enter the room. The marriage was an agreement, Mother. He was—" "I know what he was," Martha gently interrupted. "Clara, my dear, agreements don't make men look at women the way he looks at you. Agreements don't make men treat other people's children as their own." Clara felt warmth rise in her face. Even if that were true, what does it matter? He can barely admit he's alive, much less that he feels anything. "Then show him." Martha covered her daughter's hand with hers, leaving a flower mark. "Show him what it means to have family." "He forgot, Clara. It's not that he doesn't know, it's that he forgot." That night, after Samuel was asleep, they sat in the parlor, all three of them. Tom lit a fire in the fireplace, and Martha brought hot tea. They began to converse, moving from Martha's memories of her late husband to Clara's childhood. "You were 6 when you decided you were going to be a doctor," Martha laughed. "You bandaged every cat in the neighborhood." Clara blushed. "I had forgotten that." "And when did you realize you couldn't?" Tom asked softly. "I decided I would be a teacher then." Clara looked at her hands. "But then I met William, and—" "Life had other plans," Martha finished. "But you still teach, dear. You teach Samuel, and who knows, one day—" She left the sentence incomplete, but the possibility hung in the air like a promise. Tom looked at Clara with new curiosity. "You wanted to teach?" "I do," she corrected. "I still do." Something crossed his face. Understanding, perhaps. Remorse. On Thanksgiving Day, the table was covered with dishes: roast turkey, mashed potatoes, caramelized vegetables, pumpkin pie. Martha insisted that Tom say the blessing. He hesitated, his hands clasped, all eyes on him. Then slowly he began, "Lord, I haven't done this in a long time." His voice was halting. "I don't know the right words, but I'm grateful for this food, for this house, for," he looked at each of them, "for these people you brought into my life when I needed them most, even without knowing I needed them." Samuel reached out and held his hand spontaneously. Martha smiled, tears in her eyes. Clara felt something tighten in her chest, something dangerously close to hope. They ate and laughed, and Tom was surprised to find he remembered how to laugh. Martha told embarrassing stories of Clara's childhood. Samuel fell asleep in his chair after eating too much, and when they finally retired for the night, the house vibrated with the kind of warmth no fireplace could produce. Tom stood on the porch, looking at the stars. He heard the door open and knew without looking that it was Clara. "Your mother is an incredible woman," he said. "She is." Clara stood beside him. "She likes you." "Why?" The question was genuine, uncensored. Clara thought for a moment. "Because you saved her grandson, because you gave her daughter a home." She paused. "And because she sees what I see." "What do you see?" Clara turned to face him. In the weak moonlight, her face was all shadows and light. "A man who forgot how to live but is trying to remember." Tom covered her hand with his, keeping it there. "You make me want to believe that." "Then believe it." They stood like that, hand over hand, until the night cold became too intense. Then they went inside together, and Tom climbed the stairs to his room, feeling something he hadn't felt in 15 years, something dangerously close to peace. January arrived with snow, not the light, beautiful snow of Christmas cards, but the heavy, brutal snow of Missouri, which turned roads into traps and isolated farms for days. Clara discovered during a particularly fierce storm. She was in the kitchen making soup when the dizziness hit her. She held the edge of the table, waiting for it to pass. But it came again, accompanied by a nausea that sent her rushing outside. When she returned, Martha, who had stayed for a month and was now helping with the winter, was waiting with a cup of ginger tea and a knowing look. "How far along?" she asked simply. Clara sat down heavily. "I'm not sure. Maybe 2 months? Have you told Tom?" "I don't know how." Martha laughed softly. "Dear, I think there's only one way." But Clara waited, not out of fear, but because she wanted to be sure, because Tom was still learning to live, and she didn't want the news to be another responsibility, another burden. She wanted it to be joy. The storm lasted 3 days. They were trapped inside, the world outside white and howling. Tom busied himself checking the barn, ensuring the animals were safe and fed. Samuel built forts with blankets, and Clara tried to find courage. On the 3rd day, when the snow finally stopped and the sun came out in a clean, painfully blue sky, Clara sought him out in the office. "Tom," she said, closing the door, "I need to tell you something." He looked up from the ledgers, immediately alert. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, better than all right." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant crackle of wood in the fireplace. Then Tom stood up so abruptly he knocked over his chair. "You... what?" "I'm expecting a baby." Clara placed her hand over her still flat abdomen. "Your baby." He just stared at her, as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Then, without a word, he grabbed his coat and left. Clara stood there, her heart sinking. It wasn't how she had imagined it. Not the silence, not the flight, not... But then she heard it, the sound of hurried, urgent galloping. She ran to the window and saw Tom mounted, galloping down the road through the snow, so fast it was dangerous. Martha appeared beside her. "Where is he going?" "I don't know." But Clara knew. She knew deep down, in her soul. Tom had gone to St. Louis. He returned 3 days later, frozen and exhausted, but with something different in his eyes. He found Clara in the kitchen and simply hugged her. Not the polite hug of convenience, but a real strong embrace that took the air out of her. "I'm sorry," he mumbled into her hair. "Sorry for running." "Where did you go?" "St. Louis." He pulled away, but kept his hands on her shoulders. "I consulted 3 different doctors. They all said the same thing. I am perfectly healthy." completely healthy. His eyes sought hers. "Clara, this is real. I won't leave you. I won't leave our child." Tears came before she could stop them. "I was afraid you wouldn't want to." "Wouldn't want to?" He laughed, an incredulous sound. "Clara, for the first time since I was 19, I want to live, not just exist, not just get through the days. I want to live, to see my child grow up, to see Samuel become a man, to grow old with you." She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and maybe she was. Maybe she was exactly that. That evening, Tom took the papers Clara had organized about the farm and spread them on the table. "We need to expand," he said, his eyes shining with an energy she had never seen. "Another 50 acres. And I want to build a school, small, just one room. Samuel will need it, and other children from nearby farms will too." "A school?" Clara sat up, surprised. "You are a teacher, Clara, or you want to be." He looked at her. "And our child," he said the word with awe, "our child is going to have a mother who teaches, a father who works, a brother who loves him, and a piece of land that is truly a home." Martha, watching from the doorway, smiled. She had seen many things in her 58 years, but watching a man reborn in front of her eyes, that was new and beautiful. In the following weeks, Tom was transformed, not just in actions, but in essence. He woke up with purpose. He laughed more. He talked during meals about plans, dreams, the future. He bought books on schoolhouse construction. He drew blueprints. He consulted Clara on every detail, as if her opinion was the most important thing in the world. And when he finally felt the baby's first movement under the palm of his hand, lying beside Clara on a March night, Tom finally understood. It wasn't about death or life. It wasn't about agreements or convenience. It was about this, the promise of continuity, the miracle of creating something new and precious from nothing. It was about love. Simple, complicated, terrifying, wonderful love. "Thank you," he whispered in the darkness. "For what?" Clara asked, sleepy. "For showing me it's worth it." He kissed her forehead. "For reminding me how to live." Clara fell asleep in his arms, and for the first time, Tom wasn't afraid to close his eyes. There were no more shadows waiting in the darkness. Just the promise of the next morning, and every morning after that. Edward Collins appeared one March morning unannounced, with a stranger beside him. The man was short, thin, dressed too plainly to be a local farmer. Tom recognized the type immediately, an investigator. "Edward," he said coldly without coming down from the porch. "Thomas." Edward smiled, but it was just teeth. "This is Mr. Johnson. He's looking for temporary work. I thought you might have a position." Tom's eyes went from the stranger to Edward. "I don't need any more men right now." "Ah, but spring is coming. Planting." Edward shrugged. "Mr. Johnson is very experienced and works for little." Tom wanted to refuse, but Clara appeared behind him, already visibly pregnant, and something stopped him from making a scene. 2 weeks, he said abruptly, "for a trial." Johnson, if that was indeed his name, nodded. "Thank you, sir." Edward left with that irritating smile, and Tom knew immediately he had been manipulated, but there was nothing to be done now without seeming paranoid. Johnson proved to be a good worker, silent, efficient, always where he needed to be. But Tom watched him, observing, listening, asking casual questions of the other workers about the house, about Clara, about the marriage. "He's a Pinkerton," Tom told Clara one night, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Samuel. "I'd bet my farm on it." "Let him observe," Clara replied calmly. "There is nothing to find, Tom. Our marriage is legal. It's real." "But it started as many things start," she interrupted, "with practical necessity. But it has transformed into something true. Anyone with eyes can see that." She was right, of course, and Johnson saw. After 3 weeks, not 2, but 3, Johnson disappeared as silently as he had arrived. Tom expected trouble, but weeks passed with no news. What he didn't know was that Johnson had delivered his report to Edward Collins in a lawyer's office in Kansas City. Edward read it with increasing frustration. "After 3 weeks of careful observation, I have found no evidence of fraud. Mr. Brennan and Mrs. Clara Brennan, née Hayes, appear genuinely married. She is clearly pregnant, approximately 4 to 5 months along. The stepson, Samuel Hayes, refers to Mr. Brennan as Papa when alone with other children. Mrs. Brennan manages the farm books, cooks, and demonstrates all characteristics of an established wife. Mr. Brennan, reported to be ill, appears robustly healthy and works long hours. There is no evidence that the marriage is anything other than genuine. Payments to workers are fair and up to date. Accounting ledgers are impeccably organized. I recommend closing the investigation." Edward crumpled the paper, furious. Maggie was sitting across the table, quieter than usual. "Well," he said sarcastically, "it seems your brother really did find true love. How touching." Edward, $50 wasted. He threw the report on the table. "And for what? To discover they're a happy family." Something in his voice made Maggie look up. She saw the man she had married, truly saw him, perhaps for the first time in years. The greed, the anger, the inability to accept that not everything revolved around him and his plans. "Maybe we should leave them alone," she said softly. "Leave them alone?" Edward glared at her. "That farm should be yours. Ours. It was Tom's. It always was. Because of an accident of birth. You're just as much a Brennan as he is." "But I didn't build the farm." Maggie stood up. "Tom did. He worked 16 hours a day while I was busy dreaming of the city. He earned every acre. And now what? Are we just going to accept that we'll have nothing?" Maggie looked at her husband, truly looked, and realized she didn't love him. Maybe she never had. She had married his promises, the idea of a different life. But promises didn't keep you warm at night. Promises didn't cure loneliness. "I think," she said slowly, "that I should visit my brother, alone." Edward opened his mouth to protest, but something in her gaze silenced him. He waved his hand dismissively and turned to the window. Maggie walked out of that office and, in a way, walked out of that marriage too. Not officially, not yet, but in her heart, something broke, or perhaps, finally, it was set free. She visited the farm 3 days later. Clara received her with tea and cautious courtesy. Tom stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, body tense. "I came to apologize," Maggie said, looking at the tea in her hands. "For Johnson, for the investigation, and everything." "It was Edward's idea," Tom said, not as a question. "It was, but I allowed it." Maggie raised her eyes. "I was jealous, Tom. You found happiness, family, and I have a man who sees me as a means to an end." Clara gently touched Tom's arm. "Stay for dinner." "I don't know if—" "Stay," Clara repeated more firmly. "Family doesn't give up on family." Maggie looked at her, surprised, then at Tom. She saw something pass between them. Silent understanding, trust, love. Things she didn't have. Things she might never have had. She stayed. It was uncomfortable at first, but Samuel broke the ice by asking Maggie to tell stories from when Tom was small. And Maggie, to everyone's surprise, was an excellent storyteller. When she left, as the sun was setting, Tom walked her to the carriage. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No," Maggie smiled sadly, "but I will be. Eventually." He watched her go and felt something he didn't expect to feel. Forgiveness. Not complete. Not yet. But the beginning of it. And beginnings, he had learned, were sometimes all one needed. Spring brought with it not only flowers, but also revelations. Tom was in town picking up supplies when he saw Edward Collins stumbling out of the saloon in the middle of the afternoon. The man was clearly drunk, swaying, arguing with someone invisible. Tom should have ridden past, but something made him stop. "Edward." The man turned, his unfocused eyes taking a moment to recognize him. "Ah, the lucky man. The prosperous farmer with the beautiful wife and the heir on the way." Tom felt his fists clench. "Go home, Edward. Sleep it off." "Home?" Edward laughed bitterly. "What home? The one I rent because your sister spent our last savings on." He stopped, as if realizing he had said too much. "On what?" Tom took a step forward. Edward blinked, trying to focus. Then, perhaps because he was too drunk to lie, or perhaps because he simply didn't care anymore, he said, "Cards. Your sister loves a good card game, especially when she's already lost too much to stop." The world tilted. "What?" $15,000. Edward said the number as if it were poison. "That's how much she lost in the last year. Gaming houses in Kansas City. I covered it, always covered it, because she was your sister, and I thought—" He laughed again, that empty sound. "I thought when you died, she would inherit and we could pay it all off." Tom felt nauseous. "And that's why we needed that farm. That's why I investigated you. That's why—" Edward slid down the side of the building, sitting heavily on the wood. "But you didn't die. You found health, love, family. And I'm left here with debts and a wife who hates me." Tom should have felt anger. He should have felt triumph, but all he felt was pity. He left Edward there and galloped back to the farm. He needed to see Maggie. He needed to understand. He found her at the small cottage on the east end of the property, the 30 acres Tom had offered, and that she had accepted when she finally separated from Edward 2 weeks ago. It was a simple house, but clean, surrounded by a garden Maggie had begun to plant. She opened the door in her housecoat, hair down, face without makeup. She looked younger and more tired. "Tom, what? Is it true?" he interrupted. "About the gambling debts?" Her face collapsed. She didn't deny it, didn't try to explain. She just nodded and turned away, leaving the door open for him to enter. They sat on opposite sides of the small kitchen table. Maggie made coffee that neither of them drank. "When did it start?" Tom asked, gentler than he intended. "After Mother and Father died." Maggie stared at her hands. "I was so empty. You had the farm, you had purpose. I had nothing. So Edward took me to Kansas City to cheer me up. He took me to a fancy gaming house. I won the first night, $50. It felt magical. But you didn't keep winning." "No," she laughed humorlessly. "But the thrill remained. The danger of risking. The possibility that this time it would be different." She finally looked at him. "I know it sounds pathetic. It sounds lonely." The words hit her like a punch. Tears came, and she didn't try to hide them. "It was lonely. I am lonely. I married Edward because he promised adventure, excitement, a life beyond this farm that felt like a prison. But all I got was more emptiness and debts." Tom reached out his hand across the table, hesitant. She grabbed it as if it were a lifeline. "Edward and I are getting a divorce," she said. "Officially. It will be a scandal, but I don't care anymore. I need to start over, Tom, to be honest, to stop running. The 30 acres are yours. No conditions." Tom squeezed her hand. "And if you need help paying the debts?" "No." She shook her head firmly. "This is my mess. I'll clean it up myself. I've already sold my jewelry, my fine dresses. I'm going to work." She smiled through her tears. "Clara said she needs help when the baby is born, and with the school you're building. You would come work for us? If you'll have me." There was fragile hope in her voice. "I was good with children once. Remember? I took care of you when you were little." Tom remembered. He remembered the older sister who read stories, who bandaged his scraped knees, who comforted him after nightmares. That Maggie still existed, buried beneath years of bad choices. "Come for dinner tomorrow," he said. "Bring your stories from when we were kids. Samuel loves hearing them." Maggie nodded, smiling genuinely for the first time. "Thank you, Tom, for not giving up on me. Your family," he said simply. "Families don't give up." When Tom returned home, Clara was waiting on the porch. He told her everything, about Edward, the debts, Maggie. She listened in silence, her hand resting on the bulging abdomen where their child was growing. "Then we'll help her," Clara said when he finished. "She doesn't want—" "I wasn't talking about money. I'm talking about family, community, belonging." Clara stood up, not without effort, and took his hands. "Maggie needs to feel needed, Tom. Useful. Not charity, but purpose. We can give her that." And they did. Maggie became a constant presence on the farm, helping with meals, telling stories to Samuel, preparing the baby's room. It was awkward at first, but slowly, naturally, she found her place. When Samuel fell off a horse and scraped his knees, it was Maggie who comforted him, cleaned the wounds, and told stories about when Tom used to do the same thing. The boy leaned his head on her shoulder and called her Aunt Maggie for the first time. She cried afterward when she thought no one was watching. But Clara saw and understood. Sometimes redemption comes not through grand gestures, but through small moments of being needed, of mattering, of belonging. Family, Clara realized, wasn't just about blood. It was about choice. The choice to accept, forgive, and start anew. And they were doing exactly that. September arrived with a storm that made the earth tremble. Clara woke up in the middle of the night with pains she knew all too well. Tom was sleeping in the room next door now. They had kept separate rooms out of propriety, though the emotional distance had long disappeared. "Tom," she called, her voice firm despite the pain. "It's time." He appeared in seconds, barefoot, shirt half on. The baby. The baby. Carefully organized chaos ensued. Tom galloped through the storm to fetch the midwife, Mrs. McAllister, and Martha, who was staying at her nearby cottage. Samuel woke up with the commotion, frightened by the thunder and the hustle. Maggie, who had begun sleeping in the guest house during the final days of Clara's pregnancy, took charge. She brought Samuel downstairs, made tea, boiled water, and gathered towels. Her hands didn't tremble. They had been trained by years of caring for Tom as a child. Mrs. McAllister arrived, soaked but efficient. Martha soon after, already organizing the room, speaking to Clara in calming tones about breathing, about strength, about the baby eager to meet the world. Tom stood in the hallway, unable to enter, unable to leave. He listened to Clara, the sounds of pain she couldn't completely hide, Martha's encouraging words, Mrs. McAllister's professional commands. Samuel appeared at his side, a small hand seeking his. "Is Mama going to be okay?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. "She is," Tom said, wishing he fully believed it. "Your mother is the strongest woman I know. And the baby." "The baby, too." Tom picked up Samuel, sitting heavily on the hallway floor. "We'll wait together, all right?" So they waited. And somewhere in that waiting, with a boy who was not his blood son, but was his heart's son nestled against him, Tom prayed. Not the formal prayers of the church, but true prayers. Sincere pleas for safety, for life, for a chance to be the father both boys deserved. The cry of a baby cut through the air like a bell, faint at first, then stronger, more insistent. Tom stood up so fast, Samuel almost fell. The door opened. Martha smiling, tears in her eyes. "You have a son, Tom." He stumbled in, Samuel clinging to his hand. Clara was pale but radiant, her hair matted with sweat, holding a bundle of blankets that emitted the most perfect sounds Tom had ever heard. "Come meet William," she said softly. William, her first husband's name. For a moment, Tom felt a pang, jealousy, inadequacy, a reminder that he wasn't the first, perhaps would never truly be the first. But then Clara looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that dispelled all fears. "William Thomas Brennan," she clarified. "Will, to honor the past and celebrate the future." Tom approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked at the small red face, the closed eyes, the tiny clenched fists. His son, his real son. "Hi, Will," he whispered, touching the baby's cheek with a finger. "Your papa's here." Samuel climbed onto the bed from the other side, looking at his brother with curiosity mixed with immediate adoration. "He's so small." "You were like that too," Clara said, kissing her older son's forehead. "And look how big and strong you've grown." "Can I hold him?" Samuel asked shyly. Clara looked at Tom, who nodded. Together they positioned Samuel with pillows, then carefully placed Will in his arms. The boy looked at his brother with a seriousness that belied his 5 years. "I'm going to take care of you," Samuel promised solemnly. "I'm going to teach you about horses and how to jump in the river and where to find the best rocks." He looked at Tom. "Can I do that, Papa?" And there it was. The word Samuel had danced around for months, the word he now spoke with total naturalness, total certainty. "Papa." Tom couldn't speak. He just nodded, his eyes burning with tears he no longer wanted to hide. That night, after everyone had left, Martha for her cottage, Mrs. McAllister for another farm, Maggie for her room, after Samuel finally fell asleep on the floor of Clara's room, refusing to leave his new brother even for a moment, Tom stayed. He sat in the chair beside the bed, watching Clara sleep, Will in the makeshift cradle next to her. The storm had passed. The moon now shone through the window, painting everything in silver. "Clara," he whispered, not wanting to wake her but needing to say it. "Thank you for Will, for Samuel, for showing me that I was alive even when I was sure I was dead." He paused. "I love you. I don't know when it started, but it's here and it's real and I know," she whispered back, eyes still closed, smiling. "I've been loving you too, for a while now." "Why?" The question came out before he could stop it. "I was just a desperate man with a practical proposal." Clara opened her eyes, looking directly at him through the moonlit dimness. "Because you saved my son, because you treat Samuel as your own, because when you look at me, you truly see me." She extended her hand, and he took it. "And because you, Tom Brennan, have a bigger heart than any man I've known, even when you're trying to pretend you have no heart at all." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing the fingers calloused by work, by life, by love. "I thought I had a year, and I gained a lifetime." "You certainly did," she agreed, "and you'll gain decades more, so you'd better get used to being happy." He laughed, the sound light and free. Then, finally allowing himself, he climbed into bed beside her, not with romantic intentions, but with the simple desire to be close to the woman he loved, listening to his son breathe, knowing that another son slept on the floor, that his borrowed mother had blessed them. And for the first time since he was 19, Tom Brennan slept without fear of tomorrow, because tomorrow was full of promises, of life, of love, because he was finally alive. The following winter brought Maggie back to stay. not to visit, but to live permanently in the small cottage on the 30 acres. The divorce had finalized in November, a scandal that stirred the conservative community, but which Maggie faced head-on. "I'd rather be divorced and honest than married and miserable," she said when someone dared to comment at church. December arrived with light snow and the promise of Christmas. Clara had decorated the big house, pine boughs, candles, the aroma of gingerbread cookies. Will, now 3 months old, was chubby and smiling. Samuel, almost 6, vibrated with the energy of a child expecting the best day of the year. On Christmas morning, a soft knock came at the door. Tom opened it and found Maggie alone, holding a basket covered with a cloth. "I know it's early," she said hesitantly, "but I brought apple pie, Mother's recipe." She paused. "And I wanted to be with family, if I'm allowed." Tom opened the door completely. "Always. You will always be allowed." She came in, and Clara greeted her with a hug. Samuel yelled, "Aunt Maggie!" and jumped into her arms. And when Maggie sat in the parlor, holding Will as he tried to grasp her fingers, something broke inside her. She began to cry, not delicate tears, but deep sobs that came from some ancient wounded place. "I'm sorry," she said between sobs. "I'm sorry for everything, for being bitter, for wanting what wasn't mine, for letting Edward use me, for hating you when all you were doing was building something good and asking me to stay." Tom knelt in front of her, his hands on his sister's arms. "Maggie." "No, let me speak." She looked at him through her tears. "I envied you, Tom. Not the farm, but your certainty. You always knew who you were, what you wanted. I never did, so I let other people decide for me. Mother, father, you, Edward. I never chose for myself. And now?" Clara asked gently, sitting beside her. "Now I want to choose." Maggie wiped her tears with her free hand, the other still holding Will carefully. "I want to live in my little house, plant a garden, help with Samuel and Will." She looked at Clara. "And if the offer is still good, I'd like to help at the school when it opens." "The offer will always be good," Clara said. Maggie nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm also going to meetings, at the church, for people with problems like mine." She spoke softly, ashamed. "The gambling debts. Reverend Matthews organizes them." "That's brave," Tom said, seeking help. "It's not brave, it's necessary." Maggie finally smiled, small but genuine. "But maybe the courage comes later." That Christmas was different from any the Brennan farm had ever seen. Martha came, bringing handmade gifts. Mrs. Porter stopped by in the middle of the day with cakes. A few nearby neighbors were invited for dinner, including Mr. James Whitmore, a widowed carpenter who had helped Tom build the school and who, Clara noted with interest, couldn't stop looking at Maggie. The table was laden with food, laughter echoed, and when Tom asked for silence for the prayer of thanks, everyone joined hands, family by blood and chosen family, all united. "Lord," Tom began, his voice firm, "I thank you for this table, for this food, for these people. 2 years ago I was prepared to die. Today I am more alive than I have ever been." He squeezed Clara's hand on one side, Samuel's on the other. "I thank you for second chances, for strong women who teach us how to live, for children who remind us of what matters, for sisters who find their way back." He looked directly at Maggie. "And for families that are built not only by blood, but by choice, forgiveness, and love. Amen." The chorus of amens filled the room. After dinner, while the adults chatted and the children played, James Whitmore shyly approached Maggie where she was doing dishes. "Miss Brennan," he began, then corrected himself. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins. Just Maggie, please." She smiled. "I don't use Collins anymore." "Maggie, then." He spun his hat in his hands. "I was wondering, perhaps, if it's not too bold, could I visit you sometime? Just to talk. About gardens. I heard you're planting one." Maggie looked at him, truly looked. She saw a gentle man, a bit shy, with honest hands and kind eyes. He wasn't exciting. He didn't promise adventures, but there was something solid there, something real. "I'd like that very much," she said. "I can always use advice about gardens." When he walked away, smiling, Clara appeared beside Maggie. "He's a good man." "He is." Maggie continued washing the dishes. "And I think this time that's exactly what I need." That night, when everyone had left and the children were asleep, Tom and Clara sat on the porch despite the cold. He wrapped her in his overcoat, his arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Are you thinking about something?" Clara asked, noticing his distant expression. "I was thinking about the day on the river. When I jumped in to save Samuel, he looked at her. If someone had told me then that that moment would change everything, that I would find a reason to live, that I would have a real family, that I would be genuinely happy, I wouldn't have believed them. And do you believe it now? I'm living it now. He pulled her closer. You know what the doctor said? I wanted a year, just 1 year to put my affairs in order. And what do you have now? Tom looked out at the fields he had cultivated, at the house he had built, at the school where his wife taught, at the cottage where her mother lived, at the lit windows of his sister's house in the distance. I have a lifetime, he said softly, and I intend to live every second of it. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, her hand resting where their third child was growing. Then live, Tom Brennan. Live for all of us. And he lived. Years of harvests and winters, of children growing and new babies being born, of Sunday dinners with family around the table, of Samuel becoming a man and following in his father's footsteps, of Will bringing home a wife, of little Emma, the daughter who came that December, growing up to be just like her mother, strong and kind in equal measure. Tom lived to see the school expand to 2 rooms, then 3. He lived to dance at his children's weddings. He lived to hold grandchildren, then great-grandchildren. He lived to celebrate 50 years of marriage with Clara, their hair now grey, but their eyes still twinkling when she played the piano on winter nights. And when finally, many decades later, Tom Brennan lay down for the last time, surrounded by the family he loved, he looked at Clara, still by his side, always by his side, and whispered the last words that would ever be said about him. Thank you for teaching me to live. She kissed his forehead, tears streaming down her face wrinkled by a good life. Thank you for choosing to live. And Tom Brennan closed his eyes, not with fear, but with gratitude, because he had gained exactly what had been promised. Not a year, but a lifetime, a life full of love, purpose, and the unshakable certainty that he had mattered, that he had lived, that he had loved, and been loved in return. And in the end, there was nothing more any soul could desire,